Hello, welcome to today's video. We're going to be exploring Nomad Sculpt, which is a popular 3D sculpting app for mobile devices. For those who may be unfamiliar with this app, Nomad Sculpt is very powerful, very intuitive. It allows you to create stunning 3D models right from your phone or tablet. I've been using this for about a year now, and so far so good. I've made so many fun and cool things with this. For example, this flower I created from this app, printed it out, and then airbrushed it. Also, just to name another thing, a little Totoro over here. Whether you're an experienced 3D artist or you were just getting started like me, Nomad Sculpt offers like a wide range of features and tools to bring your ideas to life. You can sculpt, you can texture, you can paint, you can render. So if you're looking to do characters, creatures, environments, or anything in between, Nomad Sculpt is the perfect tool to bring your imagination to life, honestly. There's a couple of tools, especially when you're getting started, that get super overwhelming. Like, we have a whole ribbon here full of commands and tools, and if you have no background in sculpting, then this becomes super overwhelming and confusing. Nomad Sculpt is also a one-time purchase. There's no subscription fee, making it very affordable and accessible for artists of all levels, students, and people who just want to get into the skill. I'll take you through some of the main tools that you need to get started and bring your project to life. So as you open the app, this is probably the first thing you'll see. Everyone's layouts may be different. You can indicate whether you're left-handed or right-handed, because sometimes it's easier to go to the shader and the size of your brush with your dominant hand versus kind of, going all the way to the other side. And since I'm left-handed, I do have most of my quick commands here, but you can adjust it how you like in the settings. The little file button on the top. And this allows you to save your projects. You can add to scene, meaning you can bring previous sculpts into your current scene and put them together, or create an environment, for example. And the rest is pretty basic. So delete, new, and advanced. You can import any STL or OBJs that you've created in other softwares. So I often create my base model in either Fusion or 3ds Max, and I will import it into Nomad Sculpt to add some texture. It also uses a lot of functions quite efficiently than a lot of softwares. For example, there is a combined feature, or you can join two items, and I find that that works the best versus when you are using it in CAD and it's very dense mesh. So you can set up autosave, which is great if you are like me and you like to finish your projects and you forget to save. So that definitely helps. You can indicate the amount of time that it autosaves. So every 10 minutes, I feel like that's pretty good. Here you can indicate your file that you want to export, OBJ, STL, or a Nomad file. You can also export as a single object or a particular object in your scene. You don't have to export the whole scene. Okay. And you can also render, and there's some render settings there, but we can skip that for now. Here's your scene. So for example, if you had like 10 or 20 items, it will all be listed here. If you're like me and forget to name sometimes, you will forget which is which, and that is no problem. You can just click the item and it will illuminate this purple color so you know which is which. You can hide it, you can choose two items and join, you can clone, so that just cloned this item. So if you move it, you can see that there's a duplicate, and you can voxel remesh or voxel merge two items. Okay, next here we have a voxel remesh. So this, I feel like, was hardest for me to understand at first, and I'm gonna try to break it down and make it easier for a new Nomad sculptor to digest. Okay, so Voxel Remesh is a feature in Nomad Sculpt that allows you to create new topology of your 3D models based on the voxel grid. Essentially, it is a tool that enables you to generate a new mesh that it conforms to the shape of the existing model here. The resulting mesh has a uniform distribution of polygons, which makes it ideal for sculpting, texturing, and animating your object. But it is particularly useful when you need to optimize your model for game development or even just exporting of the software. So something like this has 1.33 million triangles. And when we try to export it, it's like 130 megabytes. It's heavy, it's very dense. As you can see in the topology, there is numerous triangles. So what we want to do is voxel remesh, but we want to keep as much detail as possible. So I'm just going to turn the wire mesh off. And for example, this is going overboard. We're losing all the detail in the texture. So we want to bring that back. You can undo by taking 2 fingers and just tapping on the screen. That will undo the last command. Or you can come on the bottom here and you can undo and redo very easily. Voxel remesh. You can see here, this is more dense and this is not as dense here. So we want it somewhere in the middle here because this still has a lot of detail, but we don't want to kill too much. So as you can see here that it remeshed to quads, we no longer have triangles, which is not optimal for 3D models. For printing, it doesn't matter. This is more so for game development, and if that's not your thing, you don't have to worry about that. But you can see that it did drastically reduce to 432 quads, and the topology looks really nice and clean. So let's see what the size of the file is. So it's 28.9 megabytes, which is definitely easier to deal with. When I started modeling, and I believe it was this one, I didn't know what voxel remesh was, and this was like 1.3 gigabytes for the model. It only took that one little step there, a little voxel remesh. It keeps all the details, and then you actually are able to export it at a decent time and not crash everything on your iPad. So it is a good trick to keep in mind and learn. You can also subdivide here, which will create more quads for higher detail. So after that, you can change your environment. So you can kind of change the colors. Here you can have a background with some lighting to make it realistic. For sculpting in general, I like to keep it unlit or metcap because you see the most detail, you're able to work in a decent environment. But when you're done and you want to set up a scene, you can definitely change it to a lit environment. You can change your environment with different lighting and it gives it a nice feel, but it's a little bit distracting when you're trying to model. So the next thing here is your background or references. And I personally love this, especially if I'm doing something complex or I've started modeling in another software and I'm bringing it in. You can add a reference image. You can choose your image by clicking on this button. It will redirect you to your images. You can move your object on the transform so that it fits. You can create an overlay of your object. This changes the opacity. This is great, for example, if you wanted to use it as a reference and you wanted to mold it. This is good to a certain extent because you can work on one angle, but once you turn it, it starts to look crazy. So with 3D and with sculpting, you definitely have to continuously move your object and make sure that everything looks symmetrical, everything looks good, nothing looks lopsided or, you know, there's a streak going the other way. For example, if you just wanted to use the reference to add texture and you just wanted to know the degree of texture in certain areas, the reference image is great. Here's a camera. You can add different cameras in different areas. For example, if you want to render, you can strategically place your camera to get certain angles for that render, which is kind of cool. And you can do the same for lighting as well. Okay, so this is the next one that I find is very important when starting out, and this is symmetry. You can use symmetry when you have a project that is fully symmetrical. You can also choose what axis you want your symmetry on. So over here is the X. We can change it to just the Y. And you can interchange them as you go as well. For example, if you are working on your object and then you're like, oh, you know what? I really like this design. I wish it could be on the other side. You can mirror it and do left to right, and then it will mirror your design, which I think is super good because sometimes I don't like to work in symmetry and then I realize, oh, you know what? That would actually look good on the right side. So you can do that after the fact, which is awesome. Okay, so in the settings here, you can also combine all the settings up at the top, or you can have them along the side. And I don't know, I have mixed feelings. I use both interchangeably depending on how I feel or however it decides to open that day. But sometimes it's good just to have them all in one spot. You can also rearrange your settings so that you can have maybe the most used ones up top. You can change the orientation by moving your object with the Apple Pencil. Sometimes when you import an object and it's super large, it will go to the other end of the Nomad universe and then you can't find your object. But if you press home, it will redirect you to your item. And also, just to reiterate, you can click over here and it will show you and illuminate where your item is. Here is the size of your brush, the radius of your brush. So if we max it up to the top, you can see we get a larger brush. If we minimize it, you can kind of get those smaller details there, hair-like almost. This is the intensity. So we were at full intensity here, but if we reduce it, you can see that it's just like little dimples. Here we have smooth. For example, we add texture here. We can take the smooth button and just kind of smooth it out to make it less intense. Smooth it out. And again, you can alter the intensity. And if you're wondering how I did that, you can import different alpha maps. And this is essentially textures. So if you know ZBrush or Blender and how to use alpha maps, then you'll definitely be familiar. But it's essentially just some black and white photo with a texture indicated. So this is what the brush will display on your object, and you're able to create a certain pattern on your item. So for example, this is like reptile skin, alligator or a lizard or something. And it gives it that really nice touch, makes it a little bit more realistic than just your standard very clear skin. That will allow you to take your brush and smooth it out to make it a little more realistic, or if you want to pile on another texture or do whatever you want, you have freedom to do so. I love this feature because I feel like it can take your sculpt from 5 to 10 in like just a couple of seconds with an added texture. I would do this as the last step of your sculpting model, because if you halfway through or whatever decide that you don't want this texture anymore, it's going to be really annoying to kind of get rid of it and do another texture. So I would do all that at the end. Gizmo here is for repositioning your item, for example. If we go back to our little scene here, you can add different primitives. So you can add torus, cylinder, spear, box, UV spear, plane. So for example, if we have our box, we can reposition it with our gizmo. We can make it smaller, we can lift it up, we can put it on an angle, we can validate it, and then that could be part of your design. You can also click these two items together and join them. So now they're one piece. We can then voxel remesh them, create more polygons, and then we can add our detail. And guys, these are just really rough examples. I just want to get you through everything so you're familiar with the app and you're able to make your creations. Okay, just to recap on what we have on the bottom, we have our wire mesh. So that allows us to see the density of the polygons. We have our voxel remesh or voxel merge. Mask. We didn't go over mask yet. This is also another favorite of mine. For example, we just want to work on the eye. We can zoom in, we can take our mask, and we can just draw along the eye around it so it doesn't alter anything else in our sculpt. So this will essentially freeze it or paralyze this area so that if you're doing any, commands like brushes or, you're adding your clay here, it will only alter the area that's unmasked. You can also drag, you can create different movements. And to remove the mask, all you have to do is go back to the function, the mask function. You can find that on the left and right side here. So the mask and the mask area here. And then there should be a button that pops up that says unmask. So you just want to select that, make your brush big, and remove the mask. Okay, and that's as simple as that. It's really helpful if you want to tweak a small detail, but you don't want to disturb the rest of the piece. So now we can go through our brushes that we have here on the right side. So the first one is the clay brush. So you want to use this when you're building up your sculpture. You can add density essentially. This will ultimately impact your topology, but if it becomes too out of whack, again, you can just voxel remesh. If you don't want it in certain areas, you also have the option to sub. So every brush I find, like for example, you have your brush, or you have a pinch or inflate, you also have a sub on the side here. It's essentially just the reverse of your current brush. So we can just subtract the area and remove some of the density. If you want more density, you can bring it back. You can change the size of the brush. You can change the intensity of the brush. Again, sub. So this is removing the clay. Then you can remove that, add some clay back, and so on. This is really helpful, for example, because if you feel like, oh no, I got too much density, you can definitely just reduce it, or you can undo, whatever works for you. But I find myself using the sub quite a bit just to get my desired look. Obviously this looks crazy, but for learning purposes, you'll find yourself doing this, like making weird and crazy objects. Like my first sculpt was crazy. It looked so just out of whack. Use the brushes, get familiar, test them out, do different things, just so you know what would be useful for you in certain situations when you get to sculpting. So yeah, it's perfect. It's super fun. Okay, our orientation is definitely out of whack. I don't know what's front, what's back, what's side, but you can definitely reposition your pivot point and your orientation. Symmetry button up at the top here. Okay, so the next is the brush setting. So this is just a standard brush. Kind of reminds me of the clay function, but it's a little bit more uniform in terms of its strokes. I tend to gravitate more towards the clay brush than the brush. This is definitely useful when you have your alpha maps. So again, just to bring up another example, this is some texture. You can amplify it, make it more intense. This is like symbolizes like a scratch. And again, you can smooth it out just with the function here. Layer it if you want to. It's your call. There's endless opportunities in this software. Like I love it so much. I also have a drawing tablet with ZBrush, but sometimes just due to the portability, I love the iPad and I'll take it anywhere. Okay, the next one is the Move tool. And this is my personal favorite. So here we have our alpha map still selected. So you see this looks crazy. We can go back to our normal alpha. Can move to make different extrusions. It essentially just allows you to move. And you want to take into consideration your brush size because it will indicate the surface area that you're moving. And the intensity will be the rate that it does it. So if we have a full brush, full intensity, you're getting quite a bit of reach. You never really want to do that because that will disrupt the topology, most probably. Okay, so the next tool is the drag tool, and you might wonder, what's the difference between the move and the drag? Well, the move tool allows you to move your model in a specific direction by specifying the axis you want to move along. And this tool is useful when you want to move to a specific location or adjust the position in a precise manner. But if you're using the drag tool, you can move your model in a direction without being constrained to a specific axis. Versus in the move tool, you're kind of stuck there. So the crease tool is a feature that allows you to create a sharp edge on your 3D model. Overall, this is quite a powerful tool to make a indentation of some sort. I use this quite a bit. I find myself using it to really emphasize certain features of a model. So I would definitely keep this one handy when you want to create a more polished and refined look for your model. Okay, so the next one is paint, and I particularly love this function. I've had my fair share of painting in Nomad Sculpt, so you can really bring your object to life. You also have the option of using a turntable. So what I did was click this small button in the top corner, and then you can choose your speed of your turntable, and then just click the button here, and it will rotate your item here. You can either screen record or export, and this gives you a really nice little feature to kind of showcase your model in a very nice form. You can change the background as well to different colors, but overall, like, I really, really love the paint function. You can change, make things chrome, you can make it smooth, really realistic. I absolutely love this function. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen my minions. When the Minion movie came out, I just had so much fun making these. Okay, so we have our little minion here. Again, super fun to make and create. So the paint function is super fun to utilize to bring your models to life. I forgot I made some of these. They're just so fun. This little guy. These are the models that I've had the chance to kind of paint and alter. You don't obviously require painting for 3D printing. You can just export and paint it afterwards. That's typically what I like to do as well. But if you want to do some digital painting, you can find it here. And then you can also change your paints over here and alter the color. Also the metalness and the roughness. Super cool. Okay, so the next feature would be trim. I really do like this one. It makes it really easy. For example, if I'm making a sculpture here and I want a flat bottom to ensure that it sits, you can use the trim tool. You have a couple of options. You can fill some holes. You can use the lasso tool to select. You can use a line. I typically like to use a line because it's straight, and that's it. You can deselect fill holes and it should leave it as an open mesh. Yeah, like this. But if you want it for 3D printing, you want to ensure that it's watertight. Rectangle. Yeah, so it just gives you a couple of options to accurately select what you want to remove. Okay, so the next would be the smudge tool, and that's actually only active when you're painting. So if we want to use a quick example, we can paint all, brush, different color here. So we have our paint, and then we can use our smudge to kind of dim it down a little bit. Really nice. It gives it that nice blended look. And as you can see, we have our environment here, and it's super glossy, so you can see a nice reflection. Yeah, so that's the smudge tool. Okay, flatten. So for example, we use our clay brush. And okay, we didn't want a certain section to be as raised, so we'll take our flatten brush and just flatten it up. You can also pair it with the smooth tool, and it will give it a really nice surface finish. Let's say we want to flatten the chin up a little bit. That will allow us to do so. And remember, the size and the intensity of your brush really do make a difference. Yeah, so you can see the chin here was flattened. And again, if you don't like a certain function, you can just undo it with your 2 fingers or go back. All right, so the next one here is planar, and essentially what the difference is, so planar aligns the selected area of your model to a specific planar axis, making it flat and smooth. It's like pushing down on a surface to make it perfectly flat. And this feature is useful when you want to create sharp, precise edges or align different parts of your model to a common plane. Flatten, on the other hand, will flatten the entire surface, completely flat and uniform, and it's useful when you want to reset the shape of your model and start with a flat surface. Layer is, unlike the clay, it's very buildable. This is a very precise line, so it just gives you a nice even layer on the surface. Very nice and smooth lines. And speaking of smooth is our next tool. So if we were to zoom in, you can see it's a little bit like pixelated over there. You see that the quads have been stretched. So what we can do is take our smooth function, and this will bring the quads together, making it less stretched and giving it a nice smooth effect. I really like this when I have super sharp edges and I want to just clean it up and make it look more natural. Smooth is something I use quite often. So the next one is pinch, and this essentially brings together nearby points on the surface of your model, creating a pinched effect. It could be used to add fine details, refine edges, create folds, and that sort of thing. And when you use the pinch tool, the surrounding geometry remains mostly unchanged. So if we just add more quads here, you can see the effect of the pinch a lot better. So the quads here are coming together and it's being pinched. Okay, next one is split. So as you can see here, I took the split, I took our line tool. Let me show you that one more time. And I just divided it how I liked. Let's say you want to split this into like 3 objects here, 3 bodies. You'll see in our scene that it's been cut here. And I don't think the other ones successfully turned out, but we can try again. There we go. Split again. Okay. So yeah, this allows you to split. Sometimes if you have a character and you want to make it articulated, or if you want just separate bodies to export, this is a cool way to do it. Okay, so for the next one, I'm not too familiar with the project tool. I can't say that I've used it a handful of times, but just tinkering with it for a couple of seconds, I've noticed that you can select a primitive here, or at least a outline, and select the object that you want cut, and it will cut it for you. Yeah, there's a couple of different ways to utilize this, but it's not something I tend to gravitate towards too much. Next is the gizmo. I really love this. Obviously, you can move your object, you can scale in the X, Y, Z, you can move up and down. Overall, it's just a great tool for orientating and just moving your object. The next is inflate, and this just takes a brush and pretty much just blows a bubble into it. Like, essentially pretend like you're blowing a bubble. It creates this inflated look, and you can create pretty cool designs from this. You can create different textures and just add a very unique look to your sculpts through this by inflating certain areas instead of just using the clay. That will require some smoothing because it's very choppy. The next is nudge. I see nudge as like the smudge for clay versus the, I guess, smudge for the paint. It really allows you to kind of get that smudgy look, and it's also kind of cool. I don't use it too often, but I like the option of having it. The next is probably my favorite, and that's the stamp tool. And back when I was talking about alphas, I find that this is super important when getting your desired textures. So here I have a couple of alphas that I have, and one I was testing earlier today was the brick. So since we have symmetry, it kind of looks weird. Okay, you can see the brick there, and it's a little bit intense. We're gonna lower that. So sometimes you have to adjust it so that it's optimal. If it's too intense, it's going to look crazy and raised, and from the side, it's just not gonna look realistic. So sometimes with alphas, you do have to adjust them accordingly to the level of design, and you can get a really nice look with alphas. I truly think this is what makes and breaks a good sculpt. It's texture. You don't want to do too much texture because sometimes it looks really fake, but you can also take the smooth brush and kind of dim it down and also reduce your intensity as well. An example of where I used it is actually in a recent project. I made a little tiny home here, and I am gathering some of the texture here from the brick. I also added like a wooden texture. I'm not done yet, but I'm slowly just finishing up and giving it a personal touch. So yeah, this is a good application for the stamp function. All right. So the next one is tube, and this is pretty cool. You could take a curve and draw, I guess, your desired shape, and it will create a tube function, which can be easily maneuvered and altered to your liking. So this is pretty cool if you're making, like, I don't know, hair or spaghetti, or I don't know. There's many different reasons to use this function. Overall, I think it's pretty cool. On my flower here, it has little extrusions for the little bulbs, I guess, of the flower, of the hibiscus flower. This would be super beneficial for this application. When I made this flower, I was a noob to Nomad Sculpt, so I just took some primitives of a cylinder and kind of attached it to the top and duplicated it multiple times. But there's an easier way. You can create little tubes and it will literally be perfect. Okay, so the next tool is the Lathe Tool, and this is pretty cool. I've used it a couple of times and I find that it works really well. It's super reliable. So it's pretty easy to use. I recommend having Symmetry on for this, but you're essentially taking like that tube like curve again, and you just create the design that you want. And that's it. You'll kind of get a revolving effect, as it's called in CAD. And it's pretty cool because you can edit as you go if you don't like your curve too much, which is awesome. You can really adjust it to your liking. And this really reminds me of pottery. You can really alter it to your liking. The next is transform. So this allows you to move and edit your objects. So as you click, you can change the length, change the scale, just overall edit with the gizmo tool. All right, and then we have views. If you have cameras, you can add different views, which is kind of cool if you're rendering especially, but we can talk about that another time. So we can measure. This is pretty cool, especially if I plan on exporting and I want to make sure that it's a sufficient size. It is in millimeters. So as you can see, this is quite small. So if you notice that it's too small for your liking, you can scale it up and then remeasure. 8 millimeters, pretty good. And then you can select different areas here. Lasso select or rectangular select. So this is pretty universal. Let's say we have a primitive here and then we want to select a certain portion. It will only select this portion. It's essentially like a quick select. For example, like we have 10, 20 different bodies or projects or layers. It allows you to just quickly select everything if you wish. But overall, that is the majority of the tools that you'll need to start your journey on Nomad Sculpt. And if you have any questions, I would love to help. So you can leave them in the comments or you can reach out on my Instagram. I'm pretty active on there. I truly love this app. It's just past 1 year of me starting to use it on a regular basis. And I can honestly say that I've created many fun things and had many learning experiences with this, and I will continue to use it because it is amazing and I'll recommend it to anyone. So if you have any questions, again, let me know, and I hope you guys enjoy the app and happy sculpting.